Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor, Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ. And guess who I found? We found him, our co-host, Matt Shiles. He's been all over the world, or all over North America. Don't even know where he's been. But hey, where you been?
We'll keep that a secret. No, I was in Ohio.
Okay.
See my brother and his family. And then I was in Fort Lauderdale, see my sister.
Okay. So a lot of family seeing.
Yep. It was a great time.
Great time.
We'll see if I'm rusty. It's been a few weeks.
Yeah, I know.
But we had some competent co-hosts.
Oh, yeah. And there, and that's what's interesting is that Gus is different than Tom. Tom's different than Gus. They're different than
different
you.
than me, aren't they?
Yeah. So, hey, it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. And we are in our series, Breaking the Silence. And
I'm laughing because there was this text message I got after last week when we started this series. And they were telling me their 13-year-old, I think, granddaughter said, hey, when I think about breaking the silence, I think about breaking wind. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess, okay. I don't know if I've ever used the phrase breaking the silence to refer to breaking wind. But
you can't unhear that now.
You cannot unhear it. I mean, I can read you the text. It's pretty funny. But that's what a 13-year-old thinks.
Breaking the silence. Yes. And this is about purpose.
Yeah.
Not about other stuff.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the gift of purpose, Genesis 12, 1 through 8. And this was December 7th and 8th. We talked about at the very beginning, you talked about restoring peace, reclaiming purpose, and redeeming a people for himself. That will be going through over the next few weeks. And you started with the Grinch, and you brought a little show and tell for us.
Oh, well, we do have this. We have this little mug.
Yeah.
We've had this in the Laxton family for a while. I mean, for years. So I figured I'd pull it out today because I normally don't pull it out.
Yeah.
But I did, and hey, Merry Christmas.
Cheers. And I brought one too. In honor of
cheers. There you go. Well,
cracker.
Yeah. It was so funny because Joni, she's like, you probably should have planned your sermon just a little bit better. Because I had the elf sweater on, but I used the Grinch as an example. And I'm like, you're right.
You can't win them all.
But yeah, I can. But I normally don't know how I'm going to introduce a topic until the week of.
And you had already planned your sweater.
Well, I had bought it, a week or so ago. And then, I guess I could have. I knew I was going to use the Grinch on like Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
So I guess I could have bought it didn't register to me that I should have bought it. Even though I did have that elf sweater in queue. So I do have sometimes I do have outfits in the queue.
You do?
Sometimes. Not every week. But
some weeks.
Some weeks I have it in the queue. Yeah.
So like Christmas Eve?
Well, my family is trying to dress me for Christmas Eve.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, they're trying
Is that different from previous years?
Yeah, because they want me to wear something nice and Christmassy and not what I wore last year. And I'm like, okay, I'll let you do. But like, again, I don't feel like I need to dress up like I would on an Easter sometimes. Because some people will be like, you didn't really dress up on Easter. No, I wore a Canadian tuxedo this past Easter, which is jean on jeans. So a jean jacket on jeans. It's literally a thing called a Canadian tuxedo.
I didn't know that.
Yep, man, you're welcome. Taught you something.
That's what we're here for.
Exactly.
To learn about random facts about the world.
Facts. So I want it to be a little bit more dressy than what I normally, would do. So, but I don't want it to be like Eastery because Christmas is different than that. So,
it is. Yeah.
Well, at least for me, how I think about it contextually.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a broader audience.
Well, it's a broad, but it's not like it's not like kind of your Easter best. That's not what I think of when I think of Christmas.
A little more formal.
So I did. I did think about a couple of different suits idea that would be more Christmas, not one of those weird suits that you would wear to a ugly
like a
Christmas.
Dumb and Dumber, but like a green one.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, but I did. But I'm like, well, do I? So, anyways, I'm letting the family decide. So whatever I wear on the weekend,
you're gonna point them.
I may not give them credit that evening, but now that whatever I wear on Christmas will have been filtered through at least
all of them.
Well, at least two of them.
Joni and Ellie,
probably.
Yeah,
but Caleb is very vocal about what I wear.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Luke doesn't care.
No.
Good for him.
Yeah. No.
All right, so we've done 5 minutes talking about nothing. So let's get going.
There you go.
This could be a Seinfeld episode.
Cool.
So
I got that.
Yeah. So the main point was when God speaks, breaking the silence, He gives us purpose and sends us on mission. So you laid out 4 questions that we discussed. First is, why do we need purpose? Second is, where do we find purpose? And then what does it look like for God to break the silence of purpose? And then finally, how do you know God has broken the silence of purpose in your life? So let's start with the main point, because it's interesting. You talked about, when He breaks the silence, He gives us purpose and sends us on mission. So can God's purpose for our life actually be separate from His mission?
No. Simple answer.
So
you got a follow-up question?
Yeah. So the reason I asked that is because I think, if we've been paying attention for the last 2 years, and if you've been watching on Extra Takes, I think that would be an obvious answer. But I think it's important for us to recognize that, because for many of us, for a lot of our church life, that wouldn't have been necessarily so obvious. So that's why I wanted to drill in a little bit more, because it's really important for us to recognize that our purpose has to be connected to His purpose.
Well, yeah,
and His mission.
Well, His mission. And so, and I wanted to actually use those two distinct words.
Purpose and mission?
Yeah.
Okay.
So think about currency in the sense of money. Mm-hmm. Okay, money, there is a purpose to money. Mm-hmm. But that purpose then is fleshed out in a mission. Mm. Okay, so in some sense they are very connected, but they're two concepts to a element that's connected to an element. So here's my purpose in life, and if I really believe that this is my purpose in life, it will be fleshed out in a mission. That this will become my now mission in life to fulfill this purpose. So they're not necessarily one and the same, but they are connected. You can say they're two sides of the same coin.
Sure.
And that's why I wanted to make sure that you understood what God's purpose was, but then He sends you out on that mission. Here's my purpose. Now this is your mission, right? And so when you embrace my purpose, I'm going to send you out on mission. So I really wanted to try to drive home that is that your purpose, your God-given purpose, then becomes your mission in life. So my mission in life is to fulfill God's purpose.
Yeah. I think it's a concept that we don't talk about enough, and it's a concept that, regardless of our stage in life, we're probably going to face it again over and over. Anytime we have a big transition in life, there's an opportunity for that to come back up.
Yeah.
It's not just high school graduates going into college, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about that deeply for the first time. And we've talked about this before, but it's when you become an empty nester, it's when you retire, it's when you have the loss of a loved one, when you have a career change. There's always that opportunity for you to reevaluate. What is my purpose, and that has to be connected to God's mission. And I think it's a great way to help us refocus and kind of recalibrate as we are considering that in maybe a new season. What do we go back to? So I thought that main point was really helpful, and yes, I know that was an easy question. I knew you would answer that quickly. I didn't think you would answer it that quickly. So that might be the record for quickest answer ever on Extra Takes.
There you go.
2.5 years in or something. So looking at that first question, why do we need purpose? You gave us a quote. You said we are not truly living unless we are living out a purpose.
Yeah.
So then what are we doing?
Well, yes, I think that is the question. I mean, and it really is a philosophical, deep idea.
I know.
Okay, so if you're not living out a purpose, then you really aren't living. Because that's why I wanted to quote John Walton in his book, The Lost World of Genesis.
Yeah.
Because that's where he's going to articulate what even the ancients believed. That if there's no functionality, if there's no reason of why you exist, then do you really exist? Is that to actually exist is not to physically exist, it's actually to functionally exist. Which is why I went back to that idea that even Jesus talked about, apart from me, you can do nothing, is that you will not live out your function in life apart from me. So if you are divorced from me, if you're separate from me, then you actually cannot truly live the way you have been built and created to live. And that's why, you look at in today's world, so let me go a little bit deeper in this particular element. So in some sense, in philosophy and purpose, every culture up until the Western culture has had what they called a grand narrative or a meta-narrative. It is this larger narrative of the world to help them make sense of their life. Well, now in the Western world, and we've seen this in development for the last 300 years, because it was called the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And now what we have seen is when this Enlightenment notion where mankind through their reason and intellect and ability can create whatever they want to of the world, and we don't need God. Now, because early on in the 1700s, even 1800s, even Enlightenment thinkers, they actually had a meta-narrative, and they believed, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them believed in God, and they were believers. But it was the age of scientific reasoning where things were really growing from an intelligence, reasoning, scientific manner. Well, now you could look at it in the late 19th century, 20th century, and now in the 21st century, the Western world, and you can see this in Europe, in particular all Western Europe, and now it's come across over into the U.S., there's this now post-Enlightenment idea where we have now lost a grand narrative. We've lost a meta-narrative, a narrative that is much bigger than human beings to help human beings make sense of not only the world, but of their life. And we're seeing that now played out in 18 to 25-year-olds. Is that 6 out of 10 of them, they don't even know why they exist. So this is an epidemic because we have lost a meta-narrative. We've actually lost the prescription of what life is all about. And we're seeing that. And when you don't know what life is all about and you're searching for meaning, then you're going to have a heightened sense of anxiety. You're going to have a heightened sense of depression. There was an article that I shared with someone because they asked me, they actually responded to a post of mine, and they had asked me about, is there a difference between Christian and non-Christian young adults with depression and anxiety in the quote that I talked about? And I said, yes, there was. So there's this article that came out on ArizonaChristian.edu, and it's called "The Loss of Biblical Worldview Fuels Mental Health Crisis Among Young Adults," says CRC and Barna Research. So George Barna and Barna Research, they conducted a research project between 18 and 24-year-olds, and they found that those 18 to 24-year-olds that had a biblical worldview were less likely to experience depression, anxiety, and mental health disorders. Wow. Now, that doesn't mean that mental health disorders are not real and that they don't even exist in believers, but what it showed is how much of, and again, I'm not even going to say the majority, but much of mental health disorders around anxiety and depression and so forth seem to be attached to this loss of purpose in life. Even Harvard graduate research showed that 58% of young adults, they express that the reason why they're feeling this way is because they don't know what life's about.
Sure.
So it is a huge thing.
Wow.
It is, and this is why I actually say it's the essence of life. Purpose is the essence of life. Regardless of whether you get the purpose right or not, as long as you're living out a purpose. Now, what is also fascinating, which then goes to number 2, where do we find purpose? Actually, if you begin to pursue the wrong purpose, I think it will manifest itself later on in a host of ways that you have not necessarily picked the right purpose.
Sure.
But when it comes to number 1, we need purpose because it is the actual essence of life.
Yeah.
It's essential.
Yeah. Number 1 illustrates the importance of purpose, but then number 2, where do we find purpose, illustrates not all purposes are created equal.
Yeah.
And you illustrated that with the kingdom of God and the kingdom of man, and then primary and secondary purpose. So, do we find our purpose from the kingdom of God or from the kingdom of man? So just because we do have purpose in life, we do have to really ask that question. And I think go back to that, the elements of faith, not just do we have Christianity as an aspect, an orbiting part of our life, but is Christ in the center of our faith? Without that, he won't be primary, right? He may be secondary, but he's not going to be primary. So you talk about primary and secondary. For primary, let's see. My question was, are there other primary purposes? And you laid out for man's kingdom, self-glory, fame, reputation, and recognition. Do you think those are the key ones? Are there any other primary purposes that we may?
No, I actually think this what the Bible teaches is that you either are pursuing your own purpose or you're pursuing God's purpose. And that, again, that's why I even talked about religion. Is that even if you're religious and you're having to work your way so that you feel something, that's self-glory. So that's why, on this, self-glory is happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction. So
that's helpful,
whatever whatever you think is whatever again you think is going to feed that self-glory.
Sure.
That again, your primary purpose is you. And so that's where I'm like, there's really only 2 options in terms of your primary purpose. It's either you are your own primary purpose, and then it could be, again, it's going to be your fulfillment, your happiness, your success, your fame, your reputation, however you feel and how you're building your kingdom. Just again, what we see in Genesis 11. We're building it for our own namesake.
Right.
Okay, but here's the thing: when not to necessarily get ahead, but just to show you the difference. But when you're pursuing the primary purpose as God's kingdom, then when you're pursuing His glory, His good, His purpose in the world, and thus you're on mission for Him, you're actually more fulfilled.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive.
Yeah, but you can so this is why John Piper would say we are most satisfied in life when God is most glorified through our life.
Yeah.
So we're most satisfied when God is most glorified.
Yeah, not when we're seeking our own happiness.
Exactly. And so and it was the reason why I didn't put happiness up there on the primary purpose, but I had to explain it in self-glory. Sure. Self-glory is the pursuit of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction. Sure. You are trying to do something to satisfy your own weight and significance in life, your glory.
Yeah.
So that's why you're going to praise yourself, serve yourself, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. When you describe it that way, it feels selfish, but I think I think we can easily rationalize how those aims can be noble, right? Just seeking happiness, right? That's the allure.
Well, think about, all right, so self-glory. You could look at it. All right, let's just take religion for instance. Okay, so religion. All right, so let's say you want to pursue being generous.
Yeah.
Or you want to pursue being good. What is your ultimate reasoning for doing that? I just want to be a good human being. That's self-glory of being a good human being. That's you. That's on you. That's not like, I want God to love me. Well, you want somebody to love you, so you're going to do something. That is a transactional self-glory purpose. That's why that the Bible doesn't teach that. So even if you want to be moral and good and kind and compassionate so that people will like you, so that God will love you, so that you can be saved, that's all a facet of the primary purpose of self-glory, of building your kingdom. You're building your kingdom based upon good works.
Yeah. That's scary.
What? That's why you have to realize your motive. You have to understand. Because your motive is attached to your purpose.
Wow. That's fascinating.
That's deep.
It is.
I mean, like, why do you come to church? I want to be a good person. Well, then you're coming to church for the very wrong reasons. Now, hey, I'm glad that you're coming to church for the wrong reasons, because God has a way of redeeming our bad motives, our wrong motives, and turning them around for His glory.
He does, yeah.
But nevertheless, if you give, because I just want to be a good person, well, it's all about you. I give because I want to glorify the Lord, because He's given to me.
Yeah, there's a difference there.
Huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we handle that truth in, teaching and preaching on that truth in a culture that has a real hard time thinking deeply, just in general?
Well, that's why I'm committed to doing stupid graphics. Because I think this translates.
Right.
You have a foundation, and you're building your life on that foundation.
Yeah.
And if you can understand what your foundation is, you can understand how your secondary purposes feed that foundation.
Yeah.
And and I think there's a lot of people that it resonated with. Like, so for instance, like you might feel fine. Like, there are a lot of people, I think that these are older millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers. I think they feel fine because there's still an element of, in some sense, morality and some kind of, deeper purpose. I mean, it's the John F. Kennedy generation that said, ask not what what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I mean, it was always a bigger purpose, for the older generation. Yeah. But nevertheless, there's this older generation that might feel fine, but then let me actually suggest to you that there actually might be more to life than fill in the blank. And so when I ask the question, well, what happens to you if you lose a good name? What happens to you if you lose your spouse? So I had someone who is probably in their 60s, maybe 70s. They were at Northland, and they, in front of about 20-something people, just said, your message just deeply resonated with me, hit me, because I lost my husband last year, and he was my life. And I thought I lost my purpose. And now you're telling me that the Bible says that he wasn't my purpose? And I've had to go to, and I actually had to learn that through Grief Share. Like, these are people, again, that, they were content because they had this until they didn't. And so, again, that husband did. Now, again, we're not saying that the husband or the wife isn't a good thing. We know that is not true, because the Bible does say if you found a noble wife, you found a good thing.
Yeah.
The element of this is, if you are looking for that person to do something for you, to give you something, then you are building a life on your kingdom. Because when that person is gone, where's you feel like your purpose is gone. And the same thing with kids. And there are a lot of people, I mean, in today's culture and society, people do build a life that is what is referred to as child-centered parenting. And so they build their entire world around their child or their children. And so when their children grow up and get out of the house, do you know that there are a lot of divorces that happen that are called empty nest divorces, because the children that they have built their entire relationship around, they are no longer there. And so there's been a loss of purpose. And so now the husband and wife don't even know one another. And so as a result, they ended up getting a divorce after 25, 30 years because of an empty nest syndrome.
Yeah.
What that refers to, though, is that you have built a life, thus your kingdom, on some kind of self-glory, recognition, reputation, where you're finding satisfaction, fulfillment, happiness in someone else to feed that to you.
Yeah.
But this is what, so this is where we have to understand where the proclivity, the tendency is for human beings. This is it. There is no other option in terms of where the tendency lies, because this is where I even want to show, even if you're religious.
Yeah.
Your religion is feeding your kingdom, which is why I find it astounding that in Genesis 11, they are creating a religious system that feeds their kingdom. And you see this, and I actually showed this in, I believe it was June, in our series, The Church in a Divided Democracy. I showed even how America, we used in some sense the Christian God. We used Jesus as the God that we were going to appease to seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that we were wanting as a nation to pursue the glory of God and to bring his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Right. That is God's kingdom. Right. No, as Americans, we wanted to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And therefore, we wanted to call on the name of Jesus, on the name of God bless America, so that we could be blessed by ourselves. So, I mean, it plays out even in American life that, yes, you can call us that we are we are a nation founded upon Judeo-Christian values, morality, but we are not a nation that was founded upon the building of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, because it's written in our documents, our founding documents, we wanted to pursue our own glory.
Wow. So you've preached on Genesis 12.
Oh, hang on. And we want to know why our nation is so jacked up. When you have, and this is what God knew in Genesis 11, when you're pursuing your own glory, it's going to lead to a broken house. It's not going to lead anywhere ultimate. Again, there will be in some sense glimmers of good, but it will lead to a broken house. And what we are seeing almost 250 years after our inception is a broken house. And I would say that it was never a whole house.
Sure.
It always, but what we're seeing even now, today in 2024, where our nation is, it's flat out broken.
Yeah. Yeah, there'll always be brokenness when we choose that path. Yeah. So you've preached on Genesis 12 before.
Yeah.
And 12 before. Have you ever preached on it
this way?
This way?
No. See, I didn't even look at, I can't even tell you how many times I've preached on Genesis 12.
A lot, right? More than a dozen?
Probably in my time. Because it's a main mission passage.
Yeah.
But never through this lens of purpose.
So what are some new insights?
Well, looking at it from the lens of purpose this way, of really communicating that way, because I do believe that it is a good comparison to what the purpose was in Genesis 11.
Yeah.
To what the purpose is that God's providing Abram. I will. And then when you look at what's going to proceed Abram, and then eventually they're going to change his name to Abraham. So Abraham just means the father of a multitude. So that whole name change is exemplifying and demonstrating that Abraham, you're going to be the one, basically the heir of faith. For all nations. Yeah. So they're going to find their origin in you. So you will be the father of many nations.
Yeah, I think 6 different times he says, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, so that's under this third question. What does it look like for God to break the silence of purpose? And this is where, we had looked at the kingdom of man, and then we looked at God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And you laid out, God's land, God's people, God's blessing.
Yeah.
I loved how you said, God's blessing to be the conduit and vessel in which God is bringing his kingdom to earth. So clear. And I think that's so very helpful for any of us, all ages and stages, to be reminded of and to be connected to. So this question of what does it look like for God to break the silence of purpose? Should we expect him breaking the silence with us to be similar to how he broke it with Abraham?
Similar and probably different. There probably seems to be it seems to be some kind of audible, potentially. Maybe, we don't know how.
Yeah.
But there is this clarity of revelation. Okay, so that's where I feel like it will be similar. There will be this clarity of revelation where your eyes are open to this now new purpose in life. Because, he was minding his own business. And that's when God broke in the silence. And that's why I liked using the Grinch, because there was this noise and this busyness of the Who's in Whoville where they assumed this purpose.
Right.
Well, the Grinch stole the purpose, and so they're, in some sense, as they're waking, again, the silence is them waking up, and then there's this change of purpose. So there's this revelation that happens to the Who's in Whoville when their assumed purpose is challenged.
Yeah.
And so the Grinch is sitting there waiting. And so you could look at the devil as the Grinch waiting to see the silence broken.
Yeah.
Is it going to be wailing? Is it going to be crying? Is it going to be the gnashing of teeth? Is it going to be anxiety and depression? Is it going to be all of that stuff? But when the Grinch heard the sound, it was a sound of happiness. It was, it was this jubilation. And it was around no presents.
Yeah.
It was around no lights.
Community.
It was just, And that's that's where I feel like what happens today is that when we wake up to the realization that what we have perceived to be the purpose of our life, self-glory, fame, recognition, reputation, basically building our kingdom, even though humans would never articulate it that way. But we have to be honest, that's what we're building.
Sure.
So even though they would never articulate it that way, it is definitely what we're building. So when the eyes are open and the revelation of God specifically hits an individual to say, listen, because here's what's fascinating. All right, so take all of these things that I put up there in terms of what God's kingdom consists of in secondary purposes. All of them are almost pretty much the same, but they have a different reason for their existence. They have a different direction. Okay, so kindness or work. Let's take the big thing of work. Work has it's the same work. You're going to build bricks. You're going to be creative. You're going to be innovative. But instead of building your own kingdom, you're going to build God's kingdom.
Sure.
So it's the same thing, but there's been this revelation to now I'm going to work, but I'm going to do so for a different reason.
Yeah.
For a different purpose, to and towards a different direction.
Yeah.
Same thing about family. Same thing about community. But instead of religion, spirituality. You could call that spiritual formation. I'm going to be formed not to be saved, but to be formed because I am saved, and I want to reveal God's glory, His kingdom. So that's why, and again, I added a little bit more to that house because I wanted just to show what we see in Genesis 11 as they build their city.
Sure.
And again, we see some big things there.
Yeah.
But that's the similar elements from man's kingdom to God's kingdom. They're in some sense, they're many of the same elements.
That's fascinating.
But they're towards a different purpose.
Sure. Yeah.
And here's the thing, though, and this is fascinating, because it's all built upon God's glory. So when you lose something, you don't lose purpose. God uses that loss because He's been your greatest gain. That's why if you cannot lose God's kingdom, which we cannot, that's why Jesus says, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against God's kingdom. You cannot stop God's kingdom. You cannot stop God from being glorified through the mountaintops and through the valley. So if you can't lose it, that probably is the main purpose of life.
Yeah, you said if you can lose your main purpose, then it isn't meant to be a main purpose. I think that's a great way for us to diagnose, right? Is this an appropriate main purpose for our life?
So I can lose my job, but that doesn't mean that God's kingdom ceases to be built, right? Because now he can even use my transition. Yep. He can use that period of time to deepen my trust, and for me to be a witness to others that work is not my primary purpose. Right. Because work, even though it's a secondary purpose, it doesn't feed the primary purpose of feeding myself. So regardless of whether I have work or don't have work, in God's kingdom, he's still on his throne. He's still moving and acting in this world, and he can work through our hurt and our pain and our disappointment. So think about it that way. So there are a lot of people that go through these valleys, and these valleys, because it, in some sense, it challenges their primary purpose, then their mental state, their emotional state dips with the valley. But because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he has no dips, because he is working all things out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's working all things out for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes, or his purpose. Therefore, I don't have to ride the wave of emotions and my mental state based upon whether or not I have something or don't have something in this secondary purpose world.
Yeah, I mean, as you describe that, you can see how that would lead to a more fulfilled life, a more stable life. Doesn't make it easier, doesn't make it absent of pain, all of that, right?
Yep.
But there's this resilience that comes with knowing that the primary purpose cannot be shaken.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And that's what Hebrews talks about, that we have inherited an unshakable kingdom. Like its foundation does not shake. So regardless of what happens up here in life, in a fallen world, because we lost shalom, it doesn't shake the foundation of God's kingdom. It's huge. Yeah. So that was the biggest, kind of like reveal going over Genesis 12 this time, is looking at it from a purpose perspective and comparing that to the purpose perspective in Genesis 11, and showing again the two train tracks of man's kingdom and God's kingdom, because I've shown that. Yeah. And so you're just showing it's a different way to communicate it and to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, those chapters taken together are so important to read side by side. Yeah. Yeah. So that fourth question, you said, how do you know God has broken the silence of purpose in your life? So we may have already covered this, but how do we guard against following our own purposes in the name of God? How do we guard against that?
How do we guard against following our own Well, one, you don't conjure up what you think God said.
Talk more about that.
Well, I mean, in the scriptures, that's his special revelation. Here's what he has spoken. Yeah. Now, if you feel like he has spoken to you, just go make sure and contrast them. Whatever the words are that you feel like God spoke to you, contrast them with what he has already spoken, and make sure it's in alignment.
Because it'll align.
It will align.
Or it won't.
Yeah. Now, there are some things, well, God called me to the mission field, or God called me, okay, all right. So a couple things about, so let's take some of these. All right, so take work as a big one. I think work really should be seen as vocation. It's more of a vocational call, because there is a call that God has placed on your life vocationally that supports His kingdom in this world.
Regardless of what you do.
Regardless of what you do. And so that's where I'm like, look at how He's wired you. Look at how He has wired you mentally. Look at how He has wired you emotionally. Look at how He has wired you from abilities and giftedness. Some people have an engineering mind. Some people have and when I say more of engineering, still are creative, but maybe you're more of an artist. And so an engineer, maybe you are an architect in some way. Because engineers and architect a little bit different, but how are you wired? Maybe you're really good at math, which again lends itself to engineering. Maybe you're really good at English, and maybe you're really good at communication, because I know that we have Spanish speakers and Portuguese speakers, so maybe you're just really good at, again, articulating through writing, through speaking, so maybe you want to do something there. So there's a variety of things that you could look at, and then, but always know this, when it comes to what God's calling you to do, it's always going to stretch you. I mean, it was going to stretch Abram, because now he's got to leave something. He's got to go somewhere where he doesn't know, how am I going to provide for myself? How am I going to make it? There's probably a dangerous journey ahead of me. Like, what happens when I get to this land and there's inhabitants of the land and they really don't like me being there? Like, and we see him fall along the way.
Sure.
I mean, because he's not perfect.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. He's quite imperfect, but he left. And that, I think it's in Genesis 15, where he talks about how that was the faith move that God saw that made God a credit to Abraham righteousness. It wasn't, so his obedience, his act of obedience was the demonstration of his faith. He wasn't saved because he obeyed. He was saved because of the faith that he had that led to obedience. But nevertheless, there's this stretching, there's this faith element. Like, that's where God's not going to answer all of the questions for you. Now, when you're trying to build man's kingdom, you're going to want you're going to want to know all of the in some sense what's going to happen, because you want to make sure it feeds what you want it to feed. Well, in God's kingdom, He wants you to feed His kingdom, which is built upon faith and trust. When you don't even know, when there is uncertainty. That's what I would say about kind of another element to how do you know? Like, are you trusting Him?
Sure.
I'll give you for instance. I really believe I believe vocationally, God has called me to pastor. Now, there are some pastors that they have a bivocational role, and for some, that's what they have to do until they're able to become full-time vocational in ministry. You see, Paul, he was a bivocational or a co-vocational missionary. And he even said in Corinthians, he could have asked the church to provide for him, but he said, for the sake of the gospel, here in this context, I'm not going to ask that. So I actually do believe that there is an element to the vocational realm of pastoring. So I actually believe that's part of. So my call in life, I believe vocationally and from a church perspective, is to be a pastor. I do believe that there are some people that are called to be vocationally in kind of the world outside of the church, but yet to be still a ministerial calling in the church to pastor and to be an elder. I actually believe that. But I also, believe that, again, everybody has been gifted and called by God to fill some element of vocation to build His kingdom here on earth, to give a demonstration. So I believe that if there are those in Northland, that you have a gifting in business, that God is He is calling you vocationally to actually demonstrate what does it mean to actually build a God-glorifying business. So I believe that some, again, there are engineers here, there are lawyers here, there are teachers here, there are those in the service industry here. And the question would be vocationally to you is, what does it look like for God to build an element of His kingdom through your vocatio, your calling, your vocation. And just know that it's going to stretch you because you're going to look at it a little bit different than the way the world would.
Sure.
So you need to make a profit to stay in business. But is that your primary, here's the thing, is that your primary purpose in your work or your business to make as big of a profit as you possibly can? Sure. So and that's where I feel like God will stretch us. There's a lot of things I could go into as well, like how this played out in the Old Testament. I actually believe that there's going to be elements of it of how it plays out in the New Testament. So God's land and God's people. What does God tell Israel that they would experience if they would obey Him and live under His rule and reign? They would experience what in the land? Long life in the land.
Right, yeah.
And this land would be flowing with milk and honey, even though if you look at that land, and this, hopefully one of these days I'll be able to go and experience the land, but it's a desert.
Yeah, it's dry.
But what He was going to do is He was going to build an oasis through His people in a place where, in some sense, sure, there's some fertile land in that, but it's just one big, it's not even that big. But I will create flourishing in the land as long as you live under my rule and reign. But they never did. They never even, and you see the golden age actually under David because they finally found a king after God's own heart, which is where they would experience their golden age for about 40 years. And, they would experience probably 80 years of a golden age between David and Solomon. But Solomon was not like his dad. But God blessed Solomon as a result of Solomon's dad, David. But nevertheless, you get a glimpse of a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that was protected under God's glory from people like Goliath, from people like the Philistines and the surrounding nations, that God gave David victory over all of the enemies and gave Solomon eventually rest from the enemies because of what God did. So you're experiencing just a glimpse of what does it look like when God builds His kingdom and people live under His rule and reign. I just actually think, for the most part in general, the church has never, particularly in America, and again, in general, we have never been fully committed under the rule and reign of God to build His kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Because we have so much tied American life and Christianity together, and we got to rip those apart. We got to leverage living in America and the blessings of living in America, actually ultimately for the blessing of blessing God and others. And this is where I feel like the church has really fallen. And again, not to say that we haven't done any good, not to say that the church hasn't experienced revival in the, 2.5 centuries that we've, kind of lived in America. Not to say that again, but when you look at it, I actually believe the whole idea of God blessing His people was for them to be a blessing through thick and thin, through mountaintops and valleys, and that through it all, God would preserve His people ultimately because He was building His kingdom.
Amen.
And so that's where the stretch comes.
Yeah.
That's where the leaving, going, cleaving comes. That's where the altar building, the life as your altar being built, that's where that comes from. And then existing to be a blessing.
Yeah.
So that's how you know. That's how you know.
That's how you know. So that's the 4. And as we're kind of wrapping up, I'll give you 2 final questions.
Okay.
Maybe they're easy questions. We'll see. As I was looking at those 4 questions, so you had a why, you had a where, you had a what, and a how. So I have a when and a who. So when do you use your purpose? And who does this apply to?
When do you use your purpose? I mean, and here's the thing, because we live on mission, we live with purpose.
Every day, all the
Every
time.
day.
So we don't have to wait for it.
No. Like your kindness is being directed horizontally, ultimately because of a vertical relationship that you have. Like that's why I'm saying he sends you out on mission. Like every day you live on mission because you have a purpose. Again, they're two sides of the same coin. It's I have a purpose, now I live with a mission to fulfill this purpose. So that's why I always say when I'm quoting the mission statement in Northland, this is the reason why we exist. This is what is what we are called to, because this is why we exist. Yeah.
So who does this apply to?
And who this? I mean, I believe it applies to every image bearer on planet Earth. So an image bearer would be human. Animals are not created in the image of God. Human beings are. So regardless of whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, this applies to you. Now, for Christians, this applies to you and gives you, really, when I say more details, more specifics, and more of the how to live out this purpose by being on mission. Like that's why I feel like your family can be on mission. You know, so like how are you stewarding your children to help them understand their purpose in life and how it's fleshed out on mission? Like, so this is one of the things I'm telling you know, even Caleb as he's in college is that okay, so God is calling you somewhere. Now, you know, is he calling you to, in some sense, to work in the world? Or is he calling you to work in the church? Is he calling you to maybe work in both? Because sometimes a missionary might even be called to work in both. You might work as a business person, but you're using that platform in some kind of missionary enterprise that you're on. So anyways, I'm just trying to help my kids understand how to live with this purpose and be sent on mission. You know, so it's the who is anyone, and then if you're a non-Christian, the who and how it would be applied to you is trying to understand, and even if you're struggling even to believe whether or not God exists, just begin to pray. Even if you don't even fully believe. God, if you are who you say you are, if you are real, will you give me an understanding of how this applies to me?
Well, and I think the fleshing out of the God's kingdom versus man's kingdom and the reality of what those results are, I think, are drastically different, right?
Yeah.
So for those that are seeking, or those that you have in your life that are seeking, I think this is a great model to even have you process through, whether it's ourselves or a loved one or family member. Have we been seeking primary purposes that are separate from God's kingdom?
Yeah.
And what have the results been?
You know, one of the things too, Matt, that I was thinking about as I was kind of at least mentally preparing for the podcast and maybe some things that I missed. A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Gus preached on priorities. And so when you let God set your agenda as he being the primary purpose, he reorients all of your purposes up here. And the way he reorients your purposes actually then becomes priorities. Because again, these are secondary purposes, but not all of them carry the same weight.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. Now, they may not carry the same weight, and they may not be done every day or in every moment, and so that's where, that's why you have to order your secondary purposes, but your primary purpose helps order your secondary purposes and puts them in priorities. But here's the other thing that I was thinking about too, in terms of what happens, or what does it look like, or how do you know that you've embraced God's speaking and breaking the silence of purpose in your life. So think about, I'll go back to this, element. If your primary purpose is mankind and your self-glory, think about how much energy and effort you are going to invest in building your kingdom. Now, again, whether it's work or through money or through religion or through relationships, whatever, think of how much energy and effort and investment you will, and that people expend in building their kingdom. But when it comes to God's kingdom, and this is what I want to challenge us on, we tip God. We don't invest that much in them. Let's just be honest. When you look at the majority of people in the church today, they're not looking at their secondary purposes as this investment into God's kingdom. They, in some sense, do. That's why, like when I told the story of how I got a bad handwritten card about teaching about the 10%. And I'm like, well, it's actually about 35%. If you really wanted to look at what God told Israel to give, it was way more than 10%.
Right.
So 10% is kind of almost like this, the entry level in Israel's time. Now, again, they're an agrarian society, all of that. So that's why in the New Testament, I believe that it's sacrificial giving. And some people would say, start with 10%. But here's what I'm trying to get at, though, is that if you really believe that God is using you, He's using me, He's using us to build His kingdom, and His kingdom is way more important. It's an unshakable kingdom, way more important than the kingdom of man. How much investment should we be investing in His kingdom through our work, through our giving, through our kindness, through our compassion, through our community and building relationships? And this is part of where and this is the vision here at Northland, if we can capture this vision of God bringing His kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven, because that's His vision. It was His vision in the garden. It was His vision with Israel. It's His vision with the church. Ultimately, and they all are ultimately pointing to Revelation 21:22, when God's kingdom, His city, comes out of heaven and it marries earth. Like God has always wanted to bring His kingdom to planet earth. Like if we can grasp this reality, this divine reality that God is bringing His kingdom to earth, and He's using human beings to holistically invest through the secondary purposes into the primary purpose of building His kingdom in this world under His rule and reign, to be a worldwide global blessing for every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every people group, for every ethnicity, for every race, for every gender, for every socioeconomic background. What would it look like again, you take the 2,000 people that would, in some sense, that they call Northland home, and probably more than that. But what if again, normally they talk about 20% of people investing, but what if we could turn the tables, and every person that would claim Northland as their home, as their people, as their community, would invest in God's kingdom the way Abraham did. And not say that he was by far imperfect. He was not perfect at all. What could we do here in this region, but also in the globe? Like that's what I'm like, what could we do? Like that's what I'm trying to, express. That's why I'm passionate about this. This is the vision. This has always been the vision. It's not about just coming to church and doing my little thing, hearing a little message, and maybe writing a little check, or tipping God, and going to a small. No. All of those activities of Christianity is really about investing in God building His kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven.
Amen.
And so that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping for. And I'm hoping that, this Christmas season, through this series, Breaking the Silence, that we can get a glimpse of how Jesus is the culmination of God breaking the silence of creation and shalom, breaking the silence of purpose, breaking the silence of redemption, so that we as His people. And so what I'm going to do for Christmas Eve, our Christmas Eve gatherings, is to show through the the Christmas narratives, how this fleshes out there. How shalom, creation fleshes out, how purpose is fleshed out, and then even how redemption is fleshed out. And because that's why he came. Amen. And that is what we're to be living out today. So
look forward to it.
Well, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Matt, good to have you back.
Glad to be back.
Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.